but it
Well,
was my
let's
third
go
year.
back to the first day as a driver for the lieutenant governor. Tell us about that.
Well, I get this, I'm all excited, I have a new job. I had been coming across the street in Lansing and I bumped into the governor's chief of staff and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm looking for a job for the summer." He said, "Come with me," and went back and they hired me as a summer intern and driver. So my first assignment was to drive to Kalamazoo, where the lieutenant governor was giving a speech to the regional Boy Scout conference, and all I had to do was drive him there and drive him back. I noticed we were a little low on gas and said I'll have to go get gas while he's speaking, but I got so geeked up in watching my new boss give a speech, I forgot, and we ran out of gas on the way home. That incident taught me to keep the gas tank full, but it also taught me a lot about Governor McLellan. We sort of rolled up into a parking lot of a car dealership, and the lieutenant governor said, "You know, my daughter is thinking about buying a car. Let me get out and look and see what they have here while you go get gas." I mean, you would have thought he would yelled at me and just said, "What kind of an idiot did we hire as an intern?" But he was always a gentleman, and that was an example, and that's why driving all over the state with the lieutenant governor, just he and I, gave me an opportunity to see one politician at work, a person who I continue to have great respect for. He and I perhaps have parted more on some political policy. He's a Rockefeller Republican, and I'm more of a more conservative on many issues, or more libertarian in some respects. But he's a great man, and he's one of the three governors I've really had the opportunity to work. Never had a job. He's the only one I ever had a job with, but to work with Governor McLellan, Governor Engler, and now Governor Snyder has been a great thing to make a lawyer who's interested in public policy have a pretty rewarding career.
Let's go back to your college days, because I think during that time you kind of demonstrated that you had a commitment from the beginning to free speech and the First Amendment. Tell us about your first. You attended a speech by Malcolm X on campus. Is that correct?
I did. I was out there yesterday at the Kiva at MSU, and I still don't know why I went to it. I guess I just, it sounded interesting, and it was the first experience I ever had, having grown up in a small town that had a black population that had been there since before the Civil War, and you just didn't sense the racial challenges that were, really on the horizon in the 60s. But going to that Malcolm X speech, and for the first time hearing the kind of racist language from Malcolm X, who of course was from Michigan, formerly Malcolm Little, and the reaction of the black students cheering when he attacked white people. I mean, your basic naive northern white person thinks everybody gets along, and I began to learn at Michigan State the underlying racial tensions that I didn't even know existed, and they certainly do when we had people from the suburbs came to Michigan State. The whites and the blacks had very different views of things, and I was always quite involved in this, not involved, but always believed that this was silly that we'd have this discrimination. And I remember we put on in law school a Republican Civil Rights Conference and brought Hosea Williams, the governor, and lieutenant governor again were there. And I'd be hard pressed to think that the Republican Party today would have a civil rights conference, but things were different in the 60s. And Republicans played a key role in some of those issues, and I was active in some of that.
Back on the free speech movement itself on campus, there was an attempt by one group to bring the treasurer of the Communist Party of the United States on campus to speak, and he was barred, and that offended you.
Well, the socialist, young socialist invited this Communist Party guy, and President John Hanna banned him. But John Hanna was a great American, and at that time, communists were illegal. But I felt as a college student I should be able to listen to anybody I wanted. I've always felt that way. So I called him up at Cowell's house at night, the president's, and I said, well, President Hanna, it's your university and you have the right to ban anybody you want. But we're students and we should have the right to hear anybody we want. So we're going to invite him to my college fraternity in the backyard. And we had 4,000 students show up and to hear this communist. Well, they probably would have had 40 people show up if they'd let him speak at the Young Socialist Club. But because they banned him.
Did you have beer at the fraternity for the speech?
Did I what?
Did you have beer?
No, we had no beer, but
Okay.
this was a pure political event. One of my fraternity brothers his father was head of the Teamsters Union in Battle Creek, and he was a flaming liberal Democrat, and I was a Republican, but we both believed in free speech. The next year, I was on the cabinet of the student government, and they changed the rules that you could speak on campus, but you had to have a permit. Well, that still offended us, so they invited SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the same group, Young Socialists. Well, we all got together, all the political groups, and said, we refuse to get a permit to let somebody speak politically. And we all then co-sponsored the speech by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating. So every political group had signed up as a sponsor. So they couldn't just go after the Young Socialists, they had to go on after all of us, which they did. But I think they realized that the end was near on that kind of in loco parentis, and we were put on, quote, strict disciplinary probation, whatever that meant. They did remove me from the student government council, whatever it was, but other than that, thereafter, again, in the 60s, thereafter they gave up trying to control speakers, and unfortunately now, many of those people have taken over the university, and the socialists and Marxists and so on are now deeply embedded in our higher education system, much to my chagrin. But they now keep out conservatives, which is interesting how free speech is something you have to continue to fight for.
Now, you ran for president of the student body at Michigan State.
I did. Peter McPherson sort of ran my campaign. Our theory was that while I was in a fraternity, I was sort of seen as a radical, and therefore I could appeal both to the frat community and the more liberal community. And there was 3 candidates, and I won the primary, but then the other 2 candidates got together and I got beat. So that year, Jim Blanchard won as senior class president. We're having our 50th anniversary dinner in 2014. The year before, he ran for student body president and lost. So that's the only thing with Jim and I, former Governor Blanchard and I, both have run for student body president at Michigan State, and both have lost. Now, he went on to be more successful electorally than I ever was.
Now, were you two just acquaintances, or were you friends?
We weren't really friends in undergraduate, but in law school, we were both interns. I was an intern in the lieutenant governor's office, and he was the intern with the Democratic Secretary of State. So we would have lunch frequently over.
That would have been Jim Hare?
That was Jim Hare. And so I remember one day we were sitting there, and Jim Blanchard said, boy, you must have a really exciting job. I'm a summer intern in an off election year with the Secretary of State. I said, well, it's not quite as exciting as you think it is, but it was the lieutenant governor. And he said, I've never met Milliken. So I remember I took later Governor Jim Blanchard over to meet later Governor Milliken, and I introduced the 2 of them together, and we sat there, and I remember Milliken put his feet up on the desk and sort of talked to these 2 young guys about public service and so on.